Along with individual experts, Surgeon Masters brings you life improvement strategies in 10 minutes. These proven principles and strategies are easy to learn and can be applied immediately, allowing you to practice your best. Here's your host, Jeff Smith.
Welcome, everyone, to the Surgeon Masters podcast, Life Improvement Strategies for the Surgeon Who Wants More. Our guest today is Richard Boyatzis, PhD and the Distinguished University Professor of Organizational Behavior, Psychology, and Cognitive Science, or the H. Clark Ford Professorship at Case Western Reserve University. Richard, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Jeff.
So until today, we never had an opportunity to meet before, but I feel like I've known your work for years. And as both an orthopedic trauma surgeon and an executive coach, your research has profoundly influenced how I think about leadership, coaching, emotional intelligence, and lasting change. Much of what we built within Surgeon Masters and our physician coach training program has been inspired by your work and simply translated into the everyday language of surgeons. So it's truly an honor to have this conversation with you. For our listeners who may not know your background, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what first drew you towards the study of leadership, coaching, and human change?
I wanted to be in the space program, and I got into MIT, and I got my degree in aeronautics and astronautics. And MIT got me a job doing what I was supposed to be doing, which was designing. In this case, it was the first attempt at a reusable shuttle. After 5.5 months of working in this experimental research unit, I went back to school with enough money to allow me to finish, which I did, but totally disillusioned as to what the life was like. So I thought I'd go into management. I signed up for a management course as an elective and got introduced to this subject, which at first sounded like utter garbage to me, organizational psychology. But the professor who introduced it in his class said 2 words that made me run to his basement classroom and get in, which was no tests. And the very first project I did with data, which we ended up publishing, was in the spring of 1967 on helping. And that led to Dave Kolb and I starting to develop the forerunner of the theory I've spent most of my 60 years working on, intentional change theory. But it got me into the field of psychology. And before I knew it, a bunch of the professors who had taken me under their wing, who were giants in the field, Ed Schein, Dave McClellan, Everett Hagen, et cetera, got me into the PhD program at Harvard. And I discovered I'm really good with people. And I never would have noticed that. And I got drawn to how to help people doing research. So I've always been a scientist, but I got into the therapeutic aspects of it, where we were trying to apply what we were studying in terms of issues of unconscious drives toward, at first, addiction. I got burned out. I mean, I was averaging 18 days of group therapy with alcoholics and drug addicts a month. And I looked for a topic that I could study the same dynamics of what is it that makes somebody distinctly effective and can be developed. Leadership offered that. So the shift was actually fairly easy. I did the first study in 1970 when my 82 book came out, which is an empirical book, as a research book on all different levels of management from 6 major organizations in the public sector and 6 in the private sector. It was the first ever study where you looked at people's competencies, their behavioral trends and habits against actual performance measures. And one of the things I showed in my book, that when you ask people what are the characteristics that we need to be effective, about half of the things that the incumbents and experts say are important, half of them are, but the other half aren't. And in fact, half of those are opposite to what's distinctively predicting effectiveness. So that became a driving passion to try to figure out how to help.
We learn so much about helping patients, which I think is fantastic. But I was noticing, why aren't we applying a lot of these things we learn in research to ourselves?
So the first thing is that physicians and nurses study the autonomic nervous system and then don't apply it to themselves. So technically, there is only one antidote to stress. And even mild stress is useful. So the sympathetic nervous system helps you focus, helps you solve a problem, helps you get things done, helps you wake up, but it's not good for you. It raises your blood pressure, it stops neurogenesis, it compromises your immune system, and we now know it compromises your cognitive ability. What's worse is it compromises your ability to pay attention to other people. And we now have documentation that every time you activate the task positive network, you suppress the default mode. And when you're in a helping field, you need both. You need to be able to sort things out and solve problems technically, but you also have to be able to talk to a person and find out what's going on. The number one message that I keep doing in all of my various talks, and now because the research focuses, is first and foremost, I think it's important that healthcare professionals treat themselves in terms of their excitement about what they're doing. It doesn't mean you have to do less surgery or shift fields, but you may change the rhythm and the pace of your day. But whatever it is, it's more important to have more 15-minute episodes of renewal, parasympathetic activation, spread throughout the day than an hour and a half at lunch.
And then on the individual level, the ways to maybe mitigate or start flipping the paradigm to manage chronic stress, what were a few of those pearls?
Here's my standard. I'm not going to mention it unless there have been at least 5 published studies in medical journals or psychology journals, often including meta-analyses. So I'm not talking about anything that's fluffy. First, we know meditation helps. Even 20 minutes 3 times a week helps. We know yoga helps. We know Tai Chi helps. And it's the centering part of the Tai Chi, not the kick-ass. We know that prayer helps. A caveat. It has to be to a loving God, which means if you're in the presence of a cleric who talks about hell and vengeance, and that goes the other way. Physical exercise helps as long as it's modest, whatever that is for you. Those are ones we know work. Other things, feeling hopeful about the future. Being in a loving relationship helps. Helping people who are less fortunate helps. Having a dog, cat, or in some parts of the world, a horse or monkey helps. Laughing and being playful with others really helps. We now know that. Playing music, and it turns out actually playing it or dancing, a walk in nature. Now, there are very often other things for each person that are more idiosyncratic, given their upbringing or their culture. But yeah, talking with others about values and purpose ends up being a very powerful source of that.
Looking back over your remarkable career, what idea has become even more important than you maybe originally realized?
I published a paper in 1970 saying goal setting was really important to help people change. By 2010, I had the data to say I was wrong. Not that goal setting isn't useful, but it's way down the road in a change process. So I think the biggest revelation has been the power of vision or dreams, sense of purpose. I'm trained as a scientist. So the idea of something not as practical as sitting and talking about purpose has been harder for me to adjust to, but I can't refute the evidence, and it's very strong. Now, one that I suspected early on that has come back 50, 60 years later with a lot more importance is the quality of relationships.
So as artificial intelligence continues to transform certainly medicine, what uniquely human capabilities become even more valuable?
Curiosity and talking to each other. The most positive way to use artificial intelligence is because you're curious about something and it can process a hell of a lot more data and information than we can. But if it's not curiosity driven, then it could be substituting for your thinking, and that's not a good thing. And then talking to people. Differences of opinion, differences of point of view are absolutely necessary because without diversity of thought, you don't get innovation.
Richard, thank you. Not only for joining us today, but for dedicating your career to understanding how human beings learn, grow, and become better leaders. I know today's conversation will encourage our listeners to hopefully think a little bit differently about change. So thanks so much for all of that.
Thank you, Jeff.
This is Jeff Smith, along with Richard Boyatzis. Until the next episode of Life Improvement Strategies for the Surgeon Who Wants More. Ciao.
Now, take 10 minutes and put your plan into action to practice your best.